Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Reski, and I'll be your host for today. For those who might be new to Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, we're all about bringing science, exploration, adventure, and conservation live into classrooms across North America and beyond. Now that the school year is getting underway, we'll be broadcasting 30, 40, even 50 live events a month with scientists, explorers, adventurers, and conservationists from all over the planet. So really excited for today's event. Today we are going live to the Duke Lemur Center at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. It's a world leader in the study, care, and protection of lemurs, Earth's most threatened group of mammals. So with more than 200 animals across 14 species, the Duke Lemur Center houses the world's largest and most diverse populations of lemurs outside of their native Madagascar. So today we're joining Megan McGrath. She is Education Programs Manager at the Duke Lemur Center, and she's going to take us out into one of the lemur forests. So let's bring Megan live in here with us. Megan, so good to see you this morning.
Hi there, everybody. So just to let everyone know, you will not be looking at my mask face the entire time. I am just letting you know I'm here, but I'll be behind the camera. And of course, I'm wearing my mask because we're all primates and COVID-19 is still very much a concern. So just wanted to let everyone know. But I'll go ahead and switch my camera around because one of the lemurs has already joined us. All right. Okay, so even though we're out in a forest full of places to explore, Buzz, the red-ruffed lemur, is right there hanging out inside of one of his secondary enclosures. I think either drinking water or snacking on yesterday's leftovers. But he has all of this to explore if he wants to. So we are just a few minutes away from breakfast. So I'll talk a little bit about the Duke Lemur Center for those who aren't as familiar with us, and about kind of how we keep the lemurs in this awesome forest habitat while we wait for their keeper to arrive with breakfast. So, I think maybe the keeper's arriving soon. Buzz can hear better than I can, so he's just jumped over there. So we're in a Natural Habitat Enclosure. Natural Habitat Enclosure, or NHE, is one of my favorite things about working here at the Duke Lemur Center. So we're currently surrounded by about 4 acres of forest that the lemurs have to explore. And out here we have 3 different species that share this habitat. There are red-ruffed lemurs like Buzz, there are cockerel shafak, and there are ring-tailed lemurs. And yep, I can hear their food coming. So you can see Buzz has rejoined us in his secondary enclosure. We actually call that a CSB. So I may use that acronym on accident, just letting you know I just mean this fence structure right over here. You can see their keeper, Tim, is doing the auditory cue. So those bowls clanking together means, hey, it's breakfast time. Please come down for breakfast. Now, this is an important time of day because, as I mentioned, they have 4 acres of habitat to explore. So if they don't come down for breakfast, it takes Tim quite a while to find them. We do have other ways of finding them in case they're huddled up in a tree napping and don't feel like coming down that day. But it seems like maybe today is a lazy morning for most of the lemurs, and Buzz is the only one super excited about breakfast. But each forest has a different sound that they use. So those bowls clanking together is specific to this enclosure and lets them know, hey, it's breakfast time. All your favorite foods are coming. So we'll see how many more lemurs we get, how quickly. They do have to practice this twice a week throughout the summer because that little secondary area, or CSB, that Buzz is hanging out in is a really important part of our training to keep the lemurs out here. So twice a week, all summer long, all of the animals have to come in either into this little CSB area or all the way back into the building that's attached to this forest. And they get all their favorite treats when they lock in for that time. And it might be just a few minutes where Tim leads them in. He gives them extras of their favorite treats. He shuts the door for just a few minutes to remind them how they do their lockup days. And then he opens the doors right back out and they can go back out into the forest. That's really, really important, especially when we head into winter, as we are going to do in the next couple of months. So usually right around mid-October, October is when we stop being as sure about the lemurs being able to free range out here in the forest, which is why we're doing a couple of these programs in the next few weeks, since after that, it's a little less predictable because, of course, lemurs are from Madagascar, and most of that island is very tropical, very, very warm most of the year, if not all of the year. So they're not adapted to cold North Carolina winters or snowy conditions or anything like that. It looks like we're having very uncooperative lemurs this morning. So we're going to go over and say hi to Buzz because he's the one who showed up for us this morning. And I apologize if the footage is a little hard when I move. I promise I won't move too much. But we might as well go say hi, Buzz. Here he is. So this is Buzz. He's actually named after Buzz Aldrin. All of our ruffed lemurs have a naming theme that has to do with astronomy, things you'd find in the night sky, and of course, astronauts and astronomers. And Buzz here is actually, I don't know if you can see it very well, he's wearing a collar. So that collar actually has a tracking signal. So if he didn't feel like coming down for breakfast, we could actually find where he's snapping up in the trees and know that he's okay. He's just not in the mood to come down. Oh, and I see some more lemurs have joined us, so I'm going to move over and say hi to them. Here we go. They just had a lazy morning. So these are our cockerel shafak out here. There we go. So cockerel shafak are very different from red ruffed lemur. These guys not only look very different, you can see their coloring is very different. They also move very differently. You just got to see their signature move, the vertical leaping and clinging. So even though they're moving horizontally, they leap in a vertical posture. So you can see they stay upright, their hands over their feet, their shoulders over their hips. And that allows them to leap through the trees and grab on, kind of hugging the trees as they go. But it earns them the nickname the dancing lemur. And so these guys are going up to eat some breakfast. You can see she's got the routine down, how she wants to eat out here. So she uses this wire structure, almost like a breakfast in bed situation. So that's Calpurnia up there. And then this is Gordian right down here. And you'll notice that Gordian actually has a shorter tail. Gordian's an older gentleman. He's had a couple injuries over the years. So he's got a short little tail just from that. Luckily, we have a wonderful veterinary team who takes great care of him. But just letting you know that there are not, in fact, bob-tailed lemurs. Gordian's a special exception, but he gets around in the forest just fine. The reason he's eating over here is because lemurs are female dominant. So Gordian is doing a very good job respecting Calpurnia's space because he knows that she's in charge. So he's going to eat all his favorite things out of this bowl as quick as he can before Calpurnia comes over and steals the bowl from him, which is her right as the dominant female. So let's see what he's got for breakfast this morning. Looks like we have some kale, broccoli, tomato, sweet potato, which is a big favorite. And then, oh, I see some red cabbage. And I'm honestly, oh, he's eating his beans. That's what he's eating. He's got some, it looks like navy beans that he's eating. So these guys get a variety of vegetables in their bowl. They get a protein every day. When they're out in the forest, it's beans. When they go on their lockup days and get their special treat, it's nuts, usually peanuts. That's their favorite. And then he's also got lots of chow in there. So we've got a type of chow called Bolivore Chow, which is specific to leaf-eating lemurs. Cockerel shafak have a very special diet that is primarily leaves, but they also eat some vegetables. And rarely they will eat fruit, although they really don't eat much sugar in their diet, and we don't provide sugary foods to them in their diet because these guys have a digestive tract that's about 2 or 3 days long, very, very long digestive tract to allow them to consume and digest all those really hardy leaves that eat off the trees out here. And so if you give them a very, very sugary diet, that would congest that long digestive tract and possibly even ferment in their gut system. So they eat a very, very different diet than our buddy Buzz we met earlier. Buzz is on the opposite end of the spectrum. He eats primarily fruit, and he actually digests it so quickly, it comes out the other side sometimes in about 2 or 3 hours. So just a great example of how different lemurs can be, even when it comes to what they eat and how they digest it. Oh, okay. So I just got an update from Tim, and what's happening is that the ring-tailed lemurs who live out here recently got a couple newer neighbors that live all the way across the forest over there. And there is about a 10-foot gap between their fence and this fence, but it sounds like they might be doing a little bit of staring and trash talking with the new neighbors. So they're just practicing some of their normal wild behaviors where they would mark their territory and defend it. So hopefully they get distracted by breakfast and come on over, but we do encourage natural behavior here, which means not always showing up when we want them to. So I guess I'll take a pause and see if anyone has any questions about our buddies, the cockerel chaffaa, Gordian, and a calpurnia over here. Oh, Joe, I think you're muted.
We can fix that. There we go. Megan, it's so great to see the lemurs, a few coming in for their chow, but it's also great to hear that some of them are just doing their lemur thing and they're not cooperating, which, I mean, is what you want, right? You want them doing their wild behavior.
Exactly.
So I just want, before we start taking some questions and I start introducing some classrooms, I want to talk a little bit, just briefly, about the face mask that you are wearing, just to talk a little bit about that with the students, because you know, as primates, they are similar to us. So can you tell us a little bit about why it's important to wear the mask around the lemurs, not just your colleagues?
Yeah, absolutely. So the mask is critically important, obviously, first and foremost for our colleagues. If we're not happy and healthy, we can't take care of the lemurs. But there's also a possibility that lemurs could contract COVID-19. We don't know that for sure. There hasn't been a case of them actually contracting it. But in some testing, it's been proven that old world monkeys, which are a very old lineage of monkeys and primates, can contract the virus. And so we know that lemurs are pretty much the oldest world of the primates. They are some of the earliest primate ancestors. So we're being extra cautious, even though we don't know for 100% certainty that they can contract it or what the symptoms would be like. We're certainly going to be extremely cautious because we have the largest and most diverse collection of lemurs outside of the native Madagascar. And we know that this is the most endangered group of mammals on the planet. So we decided we're not going to take any risks. So we've been wearing masks whenever we're within 6 feet of the lemurs or within 6 feet of each other. And we actually have been operating on a 2-team system. So our animal care team split in 2, and our research and education teams put in some hours to lend a hand to help them out. And we've been very slowly bringing volunteers back in, doing lots of testing. So it's an even bigger level of precaution when you're working with these endangered animals. But of course, it's very much worth it to make sure Gordian here is happy and healthy.
All right, absolutely. Good stuff. So we're going to start bringing in some of the live classrooms who are joining us. We have educators representing their classrooms. We have a couple live classrooms as well. And then it's also time for those who are tuning in via Facebook, via YouTube. Use that chat sidebar. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And then, of course, any questions you have about lemurs and the work done at the Duke Lemur Center are fair game. So let's get started. Let's bring in our first guest. So we have joining us from Canton, Michigan, 3rd graders tuning in with Mrs. Breezy's class. And so she's tuning in and she's representing her class. Let me bring her into the live stream. Good morning. How you doing?
We're doing well, thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us from Canton, Michigan. We're excited to take a question.
One question? You want me to ask a question?
Yeah. We'll start with one, but there'll be time for more. Absolutely.
Oh, okay. How big and how heavy can an average lemur get?
Oh, so this is a question that is actually more complicated than you would think because the average lemur is a little hard to say. So for example, I'd say Gordian here is actually among some of the larger lemurs. There are lots of species of mouse lemur, and mouse lemurs are about, 3 inches long. That's as big as they get. So they can be very, very tiny. And then the largest lemur is the injury, which is actually as tall as maybe some of the students tuning in today. It can be 3 feet tall or even 4 feet tall when they're fully stretched out. So it really varies depending on the species of lemur. So basically, I would say that lemurs can go anywhere from 3 inches tall to 3 feet tall. And they can be as small as a few grams all the way up to Ooh, I'm always really bad at lemur weights. Maybe I can phone a friend for. Do you remember how much any of these guys weigh, Tim? I think the shafak are usually around 4 to 5 kilograms. That sounds about right. And sometimes we have some maybe slightly heftier ones, but usually I think that's about it. And the shafak typically are our largest species here, so that gives you a bit of a range.
All right, absolutely. Okay, well, we'll come back your way shortly for another question. I'm going to bring another group in here. This time we're going to go and visit some sixth graders in New York, Astoria, and it's Mrs. Kump's group. Let me bring them in live. There we go. How are we doing today, New York?
We're doing great this morning. So glad that we could join.
All right, excellent. Well, I know some of your students are in class today, and I know some are tuning in from home. So it's great to have your group joining us, and we'd love to grab your first question.
Okay, Andrew actually had a question. No, I'm sorry, Kristen had a question. What is their lifespan typically?
Another great question. So again, this is a question that varies a lot depending on the type of lemur that we're talking about. So when you look at really small mammals, something the size of a mouse, usually they live a pretty short lifespan. And so when you look at mouse lemurs, if they're living out in the wild, it's usually, I think 5 or 6 years is a reasonable expectation, maybe a little longer if they live in an area with more resources and less threats facing them, less predation, for example. But if you look at mouse lemurs living here at the Duke Lemur Center, we've had them live 10, 12, 13 years. So they typically, lemurs live longer here than they do out in the wild, which makes sense. I mean, they live a kind of a pampered lifestyle, as you can see, getting breakfast delivered every day and getting full-time vet care. Then if you look at the larger lemurs, you're going to see a longer lifespan. The longest lifespan we've seen here at the Duke Lemur Center was a lemur that actually lived until they were 37 years old. And in the wild, for rough lemurs, a nice long age might be somewhere in the mid to late 20s instead. 30s is pretty old for a lemur, but there's so many factors that can affect age. One really interesting animal to highlight when we talk about lemurs and how long they live is the Fat Tailed Lemur. So we actually highlighted them in one of our research series that we did a little while back with Dr. Marina Blanco. She studies them because they actually are the only primate species that does a full hibernation season. And they have very specialized cells and biology to be able to do that hibernation. And despite being a very small lemur, they're a little smaller than a squirrel, they actually will live into their late 20s and even up towards their 30s here at the Duke Lemur Center, so much longer than their slightly smaller cousins, the mouse lemurs, do. So that's a really interesting animal to point out that doesn't necessarily fit that pattern.
All right, great question. We're gonna take one from online now. So we have Akash who's really curious about the sleeping habits of the lemurs. Are most of them active during the day and sleep at night, or are there some nocturnal species as well?
So that's a great question that highlights how unique lemurs are for their group. So lemurs are in a primate group called strepsirrhines, or we use a slightly more outdated term here, prosimians, which kind of translates to pre-monkeys. So there are other strepsirrhine primates or prosimian primates elsewhere in the world, but they're all small and nocturnal. So if you've ever heard of a bush baby in Africa, or if you've ever heard of the lorises who live in Asia, those are all strepsirrhine primates, and they're small and they're nocturnal, which is how they stayed around as all these monkeys and apes evolved around them with much more specialization and able to eat all the same foods as them. Lemurs, on the other hand, their ancestors made it over to Madagascar, which was an island with no other primates on it, so they didn't have to compete with monkeys and apes. So, well, that is until humans arrived somewhere around 5,000 to 10,000 years ago. But as lemurs were evolving on the island of Madagascar for tens of millions of years, they were able to evolve in lots of different ways that their strepsirrhine cousins who stayed in Africa and Asia weren't able to do. So I think most lemur species, again, it's hard to say for sure because there's so many mouse lemur species and small nocturnals that are genetically different but look very similar. So I think most lemur species are actually diurnal, but there are a lot of nocturnal lemurs as well. My favorite lemur, in fact, is a nocturnal lemur called the eye. And I did a program on them a while back that I would definitely recommend checking out. Oh, I'm very biased because I just think they're so cool.
All right, very cool. I agree with that. The eyes are really cool. If any classrooms tuning in today have never seen an eye before, I highly suggest you check it out, Google them, and then you can find past Duke Lemur events on the Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants YouTube page, and so you can learn all about the eye, which I think is a really cool species of lemur, but it definitely does have an interesting look that gets people's attention sometimes. All right. Let's bring in another live classroom here. This time we are heading to visit, let's see, where are we going? We're going to Ontario, first graders, joining Mrs. Bantata. Let me make sure their mic is on. How are we doing today, first grade?
They're doing good. We played a guessing game about lemurs today, and only 3 of the students were able to guess that the animal was a lemur.
We're doing good.
All right, fair enough. Well, we'd love a question about lemurs if you have one.
Yeah, a few of my students actually want to know what some of their favorite
I was
foods
asking
are.
what else do lemurs eat?
Oliver, you were asked to mute your mic. Sorry. Okay, so a lot of them want to know what lemurs want to eat, and I have one student that also wants to know if they need to brush their teeth.
So these are great questions. And whenever I get questions like this, I always think of what would the animal do in the wild. So let's talk about the brushing the teeth thing first. Now in Madagascar, out in the rainforest or in the forest like this, there's not someone going around and brushing a lemur's teeth every day. So obviously wild lemurs don't brush their teeth. Their teeth would just get cleaned by whatever they're eating. You're eating harder fruits or nuts that might rub some stuff off. But in the wild, lemurs also don't live as long, as I mentioned. So here, they do get some dental care. We don't brush their teeth. That would be a lot of training and hard work to get them to trust us that much and us to trust them that much. But we do annual physicals on everyone where the vets check them out. And one of the things that the vets look for is if their teeth are doing okay. And then they will actually consult human dentists and sometimes vets who specialize in dental work as well. And so we have done extra dental care on our lemurs here. They don't get their teeth brushed, but sometimes as they get older, they have to get teeth that are getting old, a little bit rotten, pulled out, or they have to get a little bit of a cleaning like we do when we go to the dentist and they scrape all that plaque off of our teeth. Now, when it comes to what lemurs like to eat, that does depend on the type of lemur. So as I mentioned earlier, Gordy here likes to eat leaves most of all, and he'll also eat vegetables, he'll eat protein, he'll eat nuts, but he doesn't usually eat that much fruit. Whereas the ruffed lemurs who live in the rainforest where there's lots of fruit, they're going to eat lots of fruit. I'm going to move so we can see them a little better. Just a moment. We've got them both hanging out on the same tree here now. So these guys eat very different things. And then if we look at the nocturnal lemurs, like the eye or the mouse lemurs or the fat-tailed dwarf lemurs, they're going to eat a lot more bugs. They actually like to eat grubs and insects. And really small lemurs like the fat-tailed dwarf lemurs or the mouse lemurs will also eat like sugary things that come out of trees like saps and gums. So if you're a lemur, you'll eat most things, but you won't eat meat. That's the biggest thing we usually don't see lemurs eat, except there was a recorded incident of a larger nocturnal lemur eating smaller nocturnal lemurs. Even that, I can't say they wouldn't eat. If a lemur gets hungry enough, they get creative. Oh, Joe, you're muted again.
All right, got it. Okay, so we're going to grab another question from online here, and then we'll swing back to some of our live classrooms again. So let's see here. All right, so we talked a little bit about what they ate in the wild. We've got someone who's excited to hear that they're the largest nocturnal primates. That's really cool. And then we have a question about raising young. So I know we're asking a lot of average questions here, but on average, how many, well, is there a name for a young lemur, and how many do they tend to have?
Sure. So the name for a young lemur is infant. It's usually what we say, baby or infant. I have seen, curiously, some people claim that you call lemur babies pups. That is not accurate. They're in the primate family, so we would say babies or infants. There isn't a special term besides that we know of. And I'm actually going to move because we have a ring-tailed lemur finally joining us after trash talking with their neighbors. So she's come over to enjoy some of the breakfast out of the cockerel chef-off bowls. So this is Lulu. She's a female and she's a little bit younger. And then I'm going to swing you over slowly to avoid vertigo. And we have Sprite over there. She's the matriarch of the group. She's the one in charge. So I'll get back to what we were talking about infants. This is a great example. So this is a mom and daughter pair. So there's a plane going overhead, which is why you see Lulu kind of listening very carefully and making sure everything's okay. So we'll see if we hear an alarm call, but I think she's not too worried about it. So Lulu here is Sprite's daughter. So she was born here a few years ago, and lemurs typically have one infant at a time. Some species can have two. In fact, ring-tailed lemurs are one of the species that can be prone to having twins, but it's kind of like in humans, where certain individuals tend to have twins and certain individuals tend to have singleton babies. In the wild, you'll also see different strategies for raising babies. So that's another thing that makes lemurs so different. When you look at a ring-tailed lemur, they can have a single baby, maybe even twins that do well out in the wild. But if you look at something like a red-ruffed lemur, which was Buzz that we met earlier, he's still hanging out back there eating his breakfast. If you look at red-ruffed lemurs, they have a totally different strategy for having babies. Their moms actually don't carry the babies on their bellies or their back as they move around the forest. Instead, the moms build a big nest up in the canopy of the rainforest, and they will actually have up to 6 infants at a time. So they don't have 1 or 2 babies that they take extra careful care of to make sure they both survive. Instead, rough lemurs will have 5 or 6 babies sometimes, and that does mean that you don't always see all of those babies survive out in the wild. So it's tough living out in the wild. And so different animals have different strategies. Some animals have lots of babies, and not all of them might survive. And other animals have 1 or 2 babies, and they make extra certain that those animals are going to survive. So lemurs actually show both within the range of all the different species.
All right, very cool. Our ringtails decide to take a break from trash talking their neighbors. They must have worked up an appetite. All right, let's head to Astoria. Let me bring them back in for us and see if they have another question for us. All right, I think I see one coming.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I can't.
Okay, ask your question. Go ahead.
So what is the length of a lemur's tail? Like, what's the length of a lemur?
The length of their tail, he's asking.
Gotcha. That is a great question. It is one of my downfalls. I'm not good at measurements of things. But I will kind of let you know that most lemurs have a pretty long tail. Sprite here is actually the exception. Again, Sprite is an older female. She's been out here for a long time. She's had some injuries over the years. So her tail is actually about, I think, half its normal length. Ring-tailed lemurs tend to have a very long tail. Let me see. I'm going to bring you guys in. Hopefully my video cooperates. And I'm going to show you Lulu, who has a full, long, beautiful lemur tail in her youth. Oh, she said she didn't like me coming in here. It's very suspicious. So we'll give her space and let her move away. But you can see her nice long tail she has there. So I'd say most lemurs have a tail that is longer than their body. But again, that depends. You know, a tail this long would be utterly ridiculous on a tiny mouse lemur. So it scales according to their size. The one big exception to that is the Indri, and that's spelled Indri. That is the largest lemur that lives all the way in Madagascar. And that is actually a lemur that has a little bobbed tail. So it's a very, very short little tail, but it's still there.
Okay, very cool. And you know, do the tails play a role in balance? Do they use them for display? What are some of those tail functions?
So for the average lemur, the tail is just helpful in balancing as they're moving through the trees, although we do have some lemurs here with shorter tails that show you they don't have to have the tail to balance and move through the trees, but it is helpful. Kind kind of like a cat when they're moving around up in the trees, like a counterbalance or a counterweight. The one thing lemurs do not use their tail for is as an extra arm. So they do not have prehensile tails. That's something you only find in the New World monkeys. That's not something you find in other primates with tails. And then the ring-tailed lemurs have one more use for their tails. Not these females here, but any of the male ring-tailed lemurs do something very unique called stake fighting. So when they are trash-talking their neighbors, a male ring-tailed lemur will actually pull their tail in front of them, rub it all over their shoulder and their wrist where they have these special scent glands, and then they will wave their tail at each other, and the stinkiest lemur wins. That's also how they flirt with the ladies.
All right, let's bring back our third graders from Canton, Michigan. There we go. We're ready for another question.
Can lemurs make sound or swim?
So lemurs absolutely make sounds. In fact, it probably wasn't audible over the stream, but when I went in to check on Lulu and she said, "Hey, you got a little too close," she made a little clucking noise at me that kind of sounds, honestly, a little bit like a chicken. It's kind of a grunting noise. And so that's a common noise we hear, some sort of clucking or some sort of small squeaking noise that other lemurs make. Another noise that all lemurs make in some form is a warning call or an alarm call. So the loudest of the lemurs is definitely the rough lemurs. They can be heard about a half a mile away just by the human ear. And they do a very, very loud call that is very hard to imitate. So I would just recommend that you look up rough lemur call if you want to hear it. And then the ring-tailed lemurs also have an alarm call. It sounds a little bit like they're crowing or like they're howling. They'll kind of flute their little faces up and go if they're concerned about something. But if they get really concerned, it gets much screechier and higher pitched. And then our last noise I can tell you about is the cockerel shafak over here. So we're going to rejoin Gordian, who's up smacking in the basket now. So shafak are actually named after the noise that they make. In the wild in Madagascar, the people who live there would hear them calling to each other when they want to check in, when they feel like they're getting a little lost. They will do a little lost call that sounds a bit like shifoo, shifoo. So it sounds like they're saying shafaka, shafaka. And so that's how they got their name. But they can also do an alarm call that sounds hilariously like geese if they get worried about something. So that's the biggest noises that they make. And I got to be honest, I forgot the other questions that was included.
Do they swim? Can they swim?
Yes, thank you. So lemurs technically, I think, can swim. There was actually a funny story of a lemur at a zoo that wound up in a moat swimming that was very unexpected because lemurs are not supposed to swim. In the wild, lemurs do everything they can to avoid water. They don't go into lakes or rivers or anything like that. So lemurs, technically, some of them can swim, as evidenced by a lemur that wound up in a moat that wasn't supposed to be there. But they do not swim. It is not one of their pastimes.
All right, so let's visit our first graders in Ontario one more time, see if there's another question. Oops, can you just unmute for me?
The question is, how long do lemurs sleep?
So most lemurs will sleep basically through the night. So when it gets dark outside, they're going to go to bed. In fact, as it starts to get dark, they usually find where they like to sleep and go to bed. And then they pretty much sleep until the sun comes back out. That being said, the lemurs also nap a lot throughout the day. And that depends a little on the lemur how much they nap. There's actually a really great research study going on right now. And someone you can follow, her name's Lydia Green, and she's Dr. Lydia Green, and she's a researcher out here. And she actually did a research series on our on the YouTube series that Joe mentioned. But she also has a great social media account you can follow where she actually follows the lemurs throughout the day collecting behavior data. And she does call out some of the lemurs for being extremely heavy on the napping. And some of the lemurs are a little more active, spend a little more time foraging. So I don't know the exact hour count, but I'd say they spend more of their day sleeping than they do active and awake.
All right, so we've got a couple minutes left. We can squeak in another couple questions. So any of our classrooms that are on camera, give me a wave and let me know if we need to return back to your classroom for another question. As well, we can maybe squeeze in one more from online. I know there's lots of students tuning in, so don't be shy. Feel free to put in another question online. And Canton, Michigan, I saw a wave there, so let's bring you back into the stream.
How many lemurs are in the world? And I know you probably don't have a number, but are they close to extinction, or are there a lot of them?
So as with all of my answers, this is a bit of a longer answer. So I'll start with the idea of how many lemurs there are. It's actually a question we get all the time. How many lemurs live in Madagascar? How many lemurs are there in the world? So let's start with the fact that lemurs are only found in the wild in Madagascar. Anywhere else you find them, they're in human care or they've been brought there. So places like here at the Duke Lemur Center, obviously, we wouldn't count as part of that wild population. When you look at the wild population, how many there are and how many there have historically been, lemurs are considered the most endangered group of mammals on the planet. So the red-ruffed lemurs, like Buzz that's sitting over there, they're critically endangered. So that's very, very important for us to conserve them. But that doesn't mean we know exactly how many lemurs there are in the wild. As you can imagine, it's a little hard to count. And researchers focus on a lot of things in the wild. With 100 different species of lemur recognized, we don't have somebody going out and doing a survey on every single species every single year. So we have to base a lot of this on estimates or on studies we've done in specific areas where we know how many lemurs there have been historically. Usually that's in something like a national park. So I would say there aren't as many lemurs as there should be in the wild. And then all the lemurs that are living in human care, like the ones here at the Duke Lemur Center, our goal is to make sure those lemurs are like a genetic safety net, so that as we work on conservation issues in the wild and try to protect more habitat for the lemurs and hopefully rebuild some of that habitat over the years, then we'll have a nice, healthy population of lemurs here if we ever get to a point where reintroducing them would make sense. But right now, reintroduction isn't going to solve any problems because the lemur's habitat is disappearing. So that was my very long answer to that question. Hopefully it helped.
All right. No, that was great. That was an awesome answer. Question coming in from online via YouTube. Do lemurs drink water during the day, or do they get what they need from the food they eat?
So that depends a little on the lemur and also where they live. So as I mentioned earlier, the lemurs here are a little bit spoiled. As you can see, Buzz is going around stealing food out of other animals' bowls, seeing if there are any snacks left over. Oh, there he comes. So Buzz here in the wild, he probably wouldn't come down for water very often, but he lives in a rainforest. So he's going to have a lot of access to water in terms of the rainfall, what's in the leaves, what's in the fruit that he's eating. But as you can see here, he's got a nice fresh water bowl sitting out that Tim changes every day for him. So lemurs here drink water a lot more often than they do in the wild. Other species like our cockerel chapak, who have gone off to another area, they actually don't drink water really at all in the wild. They will only get what they need from the leaves and the vegetables and the fruit that they eat. Oh, it's hard to see, I know, because of the backlighting, but we're having a little discussion over leftovers between our ruffed lemur and our ring-tailed lemur. So it depends on where the lemur lives, but most lemurs here drink a lot more water because it's available to them.
All right, and give me a wave if I need to. Oh, Astoria, let me bring you back in.
Okay, go ahead, Tristan.
Do you know if lemurs could be good as pets?
So this is a great question. I absolutely know the answer to this. And the answer is no. No, they do not make good pets. So as I mentioned earlier, lemurs are from the wild. They live in Madagascar. And as a general rule of thumb, it's good to think of the fact that animals who live in the wild have evolved and adapted to live in the wild. And living in the wild means not living with people. If you look at animals that make great pets, like dogs, cats, horses, chickens even, those are animals that have been domesticated. And domestication is a process that takes generations of animals. It's not something you can do with a single animal, because it has to do with their genetics, whether or not they are genetically predisposed to do well with people or not. And so lemurs are not domesticated. They are definitely wild animals. And we actually get calls not that infrequently from people who say, I thought it would be a good idea. I got a pet lemur. Now I need to find somewhere for the lemur to live. And it's really, really hard to find that lemur somewhere to live because they live with people. They've never lived with lemurs. They can't come live here at the Duke Lemur Center because they don't know how to live with other lemurs. And so rescues get those kind of requests all the time. So it's definitely something that I understand the curiosity about because these guys are cute and cuddly looking, and we want to do what we can to protect them. But having a lemur as a pet is not a good way to help wild lemurs. In fact, it overall hurts the lemurs in the long run. So even though they look cute and cuddly, we should keep our distance and leave them in facilities like the Duke Lemur Center or out in the wild.
All right, fair enough. So final question for, maybe we'll jump back to Canton. I see some waving, so let's get them back in.
Are lemurs scared of anything?
So lemurs are definitely scared of certain things in the wild. The biggest thing they would be scared of is an animal called a fossa. And a fossa, it's spelled Fossa, is a carnivore found only in Madagascar that is specially adapted to climbing trees and eating lemurs. So obviously lemurs would be afraid of those. They also are afraid usually of birds flying overhead. There were historically some large birds in Madagascar and prehistorically some even larger birds in Madagascar that would have preyed on lemurs. So here they keep a little bit of that fear. You notice that Lulu got really concerned about that plane for a minute that went overhead. They also tend to avoid snakes. So if they see a snake slithering through this habitat, even though most snakes here in North Carolina aren't going to bother them, they will do an alarm call and kind of keep their distance, which is good. Other than that, there's not much that scares lemurs. And it might depend a little on the individual. Some lemurs might hear a helicopter go overhead and immediately start alarm calling and getting very concerned. Other lemurs don't even wake up from their nap. So just like humans, some lemurs can be a little more scaredy than others can.
All right. Well, I want to give a big shout out to all the groups who joined us live today, particularly in New York, Michigan, and Ontario. And a huge shout out to the Duke Lemur Center. We love doing these events each week. And Megan, thanks so much for the care you're doing, especially during these challenging times. And thanks for taking us out into the lemur forest today.
Absolutely. You all are very welcome. And this is great timing because everyone's done with breakfast.
All right, perfect. Well, we've got another event coming up. It's a little strange. Normally we're Thursdays, but we're going to visit the lemur forest again next week on Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern. So we're very much looking forward to exploring another part of the lemur forest. So thanks so much, Megan. And thanks everyone for tuning in. And we'll see you in another event.
Hi, guys.